All right. We're live with Mystic Mark. Mark, tell us who you are and what you do.
Thanks for having me, Bennett. And I am the host of the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast. I am fascinated particularly with history, forgotten, lost history, especially, and the local history of where I'm from, which is New England, up here in the northeast of the United States. And I didn't necessarily set out to research all that. It just one thing led to another, and then over time, I had accumulated enough strange things to say, maybe I should put some serious thought into this. And so now, about 4 or 5 years since starting this podcast, I've been able to look into some of the things that at one point in time were just curiosities and nothing more. But now I've sort of put together a few ideas based on research that I've done about New Haven in particular. Why? Because it's Connecticut's first real city. It's America's first planned city. Although the Hartford area is older technically and was settled first, New Haven is really unique compared to Hartford, and that's mostly because of Yale University, which precedes the country. It was founded in 1701 and played a role in the Revolutionary War. I have a feeling that it may have played an adversarial role to a certain extent, maybe providing, at the very least, support for the British after the war. You see Yale's involvement in, World War I and II as a particular evidence of that. But I'm getting ahead of myself. New Haven is what we're going to be talking about today, but I also research Native American history and to better understand America and the history of this place. And there's a couple of stone structures that I've come across and been researching as well that don't exactly connect to the New Haven research, but there is a few things that that those areas of research have in common. So, yeah,
Yeah.
happy to be here.
I mean, it's such a small state that kind of everything sits on top of each other anyway. I mean, it's all kind of integrated and probably related at somehow at some point, right? So,
Well,
um,
I feel grateful in that sense because I don't know that I could love a state as as much as I do love Connecticut, and maybe it would be a lot more of a challenge if I lived in a bigger state. Because yeah, you're right. I mean, everything is so condensed that I feel like I know the entire state pretty well. If you threw a dart at a map of Connecticut, there's a good chance it'll land on somewhere I've been. So yeah,
yeah, right.
it's a small state, but with
Yeah,
a big heart, as we like to say.
for sure. Yeah. My whole family, basically are grads of UConn. So my great grandfather was the athletic director there for like 30 years. There's a gymnasium there named after him and everything. So
Cool.
so I have deep roots in Connecticut. Plus, I love the state too. It's just so expensive to try and do anything. I love taking my family down. I love the Mystic area, all that stuff. So,
Absolutely.
so at the end of the day, though, what is what's your gateway to this whole world of like crazy high strangeness and all this? Like, what was your gateway drug to that world? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it was the time I spent in New Haven while I was at community college. I was more interested in wandering around the city than I was paying attention in class. So in between classes, I would just go and wander around, and yeah, I just really started to take it all in, and one thing after another. sort of piled up. And then eventually I met a gentleman named Amos who I became friends with, and he taught me about Geronimo and how his skull was not only, robbed from its resting place from his grave in Oklahoma, but brought as a trophy to New Haven and kept in the Skull and Bones tomb. So when I found that out, I was pretty upset. I think naturally most people are kind of disturbed.
Yeah, that is disturbing.
Yeah, and rightly so. But yeah, that was one of many little things that led to me getting into this in a serious way. But back then, I was more interested in, yeah, just kind of stripping away the indoctrination of whatever was, dispensed to me in public school, and
Gotcha.
trying to figure everything out for myself. So I was attracted to books like The Secret History of the World by Mark Booth, or The Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall. Yaqui Way, The Teachings of Don Juan by Carlos Castaneda was another big one for me. And then those books were referential enough to allow to be like a guide for other books. And then from there, I just kept reading you know, at an average pace. I'm not, some kind of avid savant reader, but you pointed out how many books I have. I'm probably a savant spendthrift when it comes to books. So yeah,
Right.
I have a lot
Yeah,
of
yeah.
them, and that's the fun thing about nonfiction is you're not necessarily on the hook to finish reading them, right? Because with a
Mhm, mhm.
novel, you sort of got to read the whole thing through. With nonfiction, I like taking in what information is relative to what I'm researching at that moment in time. So I do like reference books for that reason. And I've been drawn to all sorts of strange books that have kind of helped me piece apart what's really going on in New Haven. And I think the most interesting part to me has become the part that's just hiding in plain sight, right? Because we've all heard about the Skull and Bones
Mhm.
cult and the secret society and all these things they do. And some of those rumors may never be substantiated. Some of it may be true, some of it may be false. Unless I join, I don't know. But what I can prove is that there is a energetic imprint that is imbued on a person who walks through New Haven. And I know that because I enjoy it. I basked in it for a long time. I just walk around New Haven and see what stood out, see what found me. And now I think there's a sort of map that I've figured out and some connections that I've drawn symbolically and actually, as you pointed out. The ley lines were what drew you to my research. So why don't, if I can, I don't know if I'm able to share my screen with the
Yeah, you
riverside.
should be
I
able
think I
to.
should be able to. So I can show you the map that I learned about from a gentleman named Peter Shampoo, who I'm a big fan of. His book is called The Gaia Matrix, and it is essentially a one of a kind kind of mapping of ley lines around the world, and then an in depth explanation as to not only how he mapped these out, but each ley line's characteristics, qualities, and why they're unique. So, what we're looking at is three photos. The one on the left hand side is the one from Peter's book, and then the one that we see in the center is from Peter's website. Now, the one on the right hand side is a book I found, or a photo I found that maps out
The Ivies.
the seven different Ivy League schools, or eight, nine, seven. I don't know how many altogether. I think it's eight Ivy League schools,
Yeah, there's
and
8.
six out of the eight are all on this ley line. Now, this ley line goes through major cities: Boston, New York City, Philadelphia, Atlanta, New Orleans, and even Mexico City when you draw it far enough
Mhm.
southward. but particularly for our purposes, it goes through New Haven and Yale. And I think that is not only significant, but maybe evidence that these colleges were planned out in some sort of way. Maybe not in a way like executively where one person said, okay, we're going to build all these colleges, but maybe they realized like, okay, this is a powerful line of energy that we can utilize for this purpose. So if we're going to have a school worth its salt, it has to be on a ley line, right? Maybe this became something that they had to do because it set their schools apart. And I mean, in many
Right.
ways, they are kind of living. So yeah, that is the ley
Yeah,
line.
that's an intriguing map right there. I mean, they're all intriguing, but the one with the 6 schools just in this nice little like I-95 corridor kind of, you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, it's funny because that was the before it was an interstate highway, that was the Boston Post Road, which is
Yeah,
one of
Route
America's
1.
oldest roads. Yeah, Route One.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely significant, and it's a little bit of both ways, because not only do the ley lines affect culture, but the culture affects the ley line, right? So
Yeah,
it's a
absolutely.
give and take. But yeah, this ley line goes through Yale, and Yale's whole campus is set on a 9 square grid, which is also significant.
Right.
Um, it's like a sort of Kabbalistic magical square that is designed to symbolize Saturn.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Man.
And
It's
I didn't necessarily put that together right away. It took me a couple years to kind of figure that out, but I had always noticed that the green, and you'll probably remember,
yeah, the
the,
green.
the green has a strange pattern on the path marks. Like,
Yeah, the 9. Well, I said 9, but and then
oh,
isn't there a church right in the middle from what I remember?
yeah,
Or
there's three
yeah.
churches in the center, all facing the east on Temple Street there.
Yeah, there they
So, yeah, we have these lines going through the square in this pattern that kind of looks like what you might see in an occult handbook,
Yeah.
sigils, or something like that. So that's always stood out to me, and that's kind of what I was trying to make sense of when I realized, oh, this 9 square grid is not just a simple shape that, I mean, obviously now if you go to a big city like Denver or Dallas or Los Angeles, like one of these cities that was built on the West Coast or in the Midwest where they had a much more flat ground to work with, they're all gridded out. But traditionally, towns weren't set up like that because people weren't building towns with, modern transportation in mind. So this is something that has sort of an anomalous feature, because at the time when this 9 square grid was plotted out, you didn't have towns really situated like that.
Right.
So that's kind of what makes me think, maybe there's something more to this, and it's retained that form over the years as it's expanded into a bigger city.
Yeah, it's crazy. I've spent so much time down there and I'm just looking. And it's like you forget until you see it all again. And I mean, I remember, isn't there a crypt in the bottom of one of those churches?
Yeah, yeah. So this is part of the strange side of it, is that the New Haven Green is pretty much a cemetery.
Yeah, that's what I remember from
Yeah,
being, wow, which is so creepy. It's like 130 people buried there, something like that.
600, I think.
600.
Yeah, and
Wow.
they moved a lot of people to the Grove Street Cemetery in the 1800s,
Right.
because that was sort of like uh, a cemetery for the well off, right? So anybody who was
Gotcha.
memorable or had connections to those families was exhumed and then brought to the new cemetery. And then the old cemetery was really just kind of forgotten about. The only real, yeah, way to know that that is a grave site is by going into the church and seeing that they have the tomb there. I don't know if they mention, I mean, I'm sure they're not hiding it, but yeah, there are gravestones behind the center church
Yeah.
and in fact under the ground behind all the churches. It's just one big grave site.
Right. So, okay, man. All right. So Skull and Bones technically originated, well, that's where it's at in essence right now, right?
So Skull and Bones started in 1832, and it was very much a part of Yale's culture to be in a sort of a club like this. It wasn't like a completely new thing when it was formed. They had these groups called debating societies. So the debating societies sort of born out of those were born these more specialized private groups that were designed to be networking, and they're just sort of study groups and ways for men to link up with each other and create long lasting relationships into, the rest of their lives. And think about it, at the time, Yale is one of a few colleges on what is then a wild frontier. Like the East Coast was fairly settled, but beyond the Appalachian Mountains up until, you know, uh, mid 19th century. I mean, only in the mid 19th
Yeah.
century were they really expanding out into the West in a developed way. Before that, it was like, you could band together with a couple of your friends and literally start a town, right? So I think
Right.
networking back then took on a different emphasis. You could probably make some really great business partners in college, like at these times, and I think people were just taking advantage of all of the massive amount of resources that were here in this country. So yeah, it was kind of like
Right.
a gold rush in that sense. And the debating societies were progressively becoming less and less interested in like what the actual college was teaching them, and it kind of helped liberalize the colleges and bring in liberal arts and different pieces of what is now, Yale's total curriculum. But at the beginning it was like all based around the Bible and a couple of Platonic works. There wasn't really much, being taught, but they've expanded over and over, and these debating societies were part of that expansion. Yada yada. The Skull and Bones forms at a time when they're looking to become more exclusive, because there was something at that time in America called the Great Masonic Panic, or the beginnings of the first third party in American politics. This was the anti Mason party, and it caused these debating societies to be kind of called into question because there were Freemasonic aspects to them, which is then why Skull and Bones and these other groups started forming so that they can have some privacy to conduct, this.
Kind of going underground.
Yeah, exactly. Going underground. And, the German element of Skull and Bones comes from its founders being in Germany, I think their sophomore and junior summer between courses. They summered in Germany and were exposed to the Hegelian dialect, Hegelianism, and the other politically radical ideas of the time that were very much alive in Germany. And we know what happened, with
Yeah.
Germany. Uh, you know, I think
Kind of
it's
went
all
sideways.
connected. It's all, well, it went sideways for sure, but I think it got manipulated that way.
Hmm.
And Yale's very much a part of that. They helped finance the Nazi party. So,
Yeah. How
Yeah,
many? I wonder how many Nazis were actually educated at Yale.
that's a good question. I mean, obviously, that would have had to be at up into a certain year, because I'm sure
Yeah,
after a
right.
certain year they would not have been allowed in the United States at
Of
all.
course,
But there were
but still,
thousands
I
of
mean,
Germans in America
yeah,
prior to World War One and Two. So yeah, spot on. I mean, and that was 1832 is when Skull and Bones was founded. So this German American relationship had at least 100 years or more before the World War One and Two. But yeah, I haven't looked into the World War Two history yet as much. I don't have it
yeah,
all sort of memorized, but I know that Yale was sending students to the war front during World War One as bombers. So they would go to England to get in a plane, and then they would fly bombing runs for the British. But here's the
right,
thing, they're American citizens. And at that point, America
yeah.
was not officially involved in the war. So, it's you read things like that, you wonder like what's going on with these Ivy League schools, Yale,
Yeah,
Harvard. They have so much
because
influence.
something very similar happened in World War II with pilots as well,
Oh yeah.
where American pilots flew for the British because we weren't technically in the war yet,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So
Like a
same
reserve,
sort of thing.
sort of like a reserves type of.
Yeah, kind of like the
Right.
whole Flying Tigers in China too. They were like private contractors, to an extent.
Yeah.
So
Well, that makes sense because Yale was essentially started with money from the Dutch East Indies Company, and what are they but mercenaries in many,
absolutely,
in that sense. So, yeah, New Haven is a melting pot of not only, you know, these elite ideas, but a very particular strain of it that comes from Germany, and I think is partially responsible for this Marxist, neo Marxist mentality that we have now in a lot of the universities and colleges here in America. I think it starts with Skull and Bones and Yale and bringing these Marxist ideologies into the college setting. And you see slowly but surely after Skull and Bones is formed, key events that begin to break down America's sovereignty, right? Because participating in World War One and Two on the sides of the British, I mean, are we going to just? I know there's mainstream historians who will explain, why America became allies with Britain over time, right? But
yeah,
I think part of that is due to Yale University and Harvard and this elite management, right? Where they
yeah.
never quite gave up control of America. They let us have our own country for a certain time, but after a while, they kind of infiltrated and brought us back into the fold. It's kind of my suspicion. It's not a fully formed thought that I can prove, but it's a speculation that is backed up by the evidence that I've been slowly gathering. So,
So when it comes to like Skull and Bones specifically,
mhm.
because we're talking about, you know, uh, is there like an occult type, or even not just occult? Because I know there's occult stuff, uh, obviously, right? that influences all that stuff. But is there anything like that points towards maybe like Luciferian or like Malachian type stuff that's got to do with um or is it all kind of related?
It's all related. I think that when it comes to religion, there is the exoteric and the esoteric. The elites, they will use whatever costume suits them. That is the
That's a
exoteric.
great way to put it.
That's the exoteric. It's the costume. So the costume of Yale is, oh, we're a Judeo-Christian organization. We're here to, study the great roots of our Judeo-Christian Western civilization, right? This is kind of the notion that's implanted on you if you just study this from a very surface level. Oh, Yale is a Christian college. They study the Bible. But then you take a
Yeah,
walk around
right.
campus and you see all of the occult symbols and you say to yourself, okay, yeah, maybe there is something deeper here. Because if you just take the surface level of it, the average Christian or Jewish or Muslim person, devout person, is very superstitious of anything demonic, or, these symbols don't take on the implication that you would think, connects to education. It's more of an implication of fear, death, the negative of life, which makes sense. But I think what we're looking at here is something altogether different. Again,
Hmm.
it's not the costume. The costume is worthless. That's all just to keep the facade going, to keep their power going. Christian, Muslim, Jewish, this is all just the facade that they're using uh, to practice the real religion, which involves symbols like Moloch and Baal and all these other things that we've
Yeah,
been superstitiously taught to think of as representing evil. The whole thing is evil. The whole idea that one authority has control over you is evil. And that's what these institutions represent on a very simple level, but they have to code it in these ideas of making a person smarter, or raising society, or just trying to understand the truth, or just being good Christians and studying the Bible. And
right.
they hide it in these other things, these distractions. But the truth is there's an esoteric and there's an exoteric. And the esoteric is designed that way to keep a certain group of people in power. And the
Yeah,
only thing that separates them from anyone else is the knowledge. So exclusivity is inherently theft of your right to know these things too, right? They're being exclusive about the ancient religions or the ancient ways of understanding the world because they want the privilege of having that power themselves. So they've obscured it to the rest of us. They've created dogma to keep people busy, to keep people pacified, so that they can continue to amass wealth and really break the rules of nature. And they need our consent to do that. Um, so yeah, I don't necessarily get caught up in, oh, it's Moloch, oh, it's Satan, oh, it's Lucifer. All of that is the same to me. Like those are all just
hmm,
symbols within this esoteric world. And the only difference between, somebody who knows about it or someone who doesn't is just that. It's whether they know about it or not. And there's been a struggle throughout history to keep that knowledge within the hands of certain people. That's exactly what colleges are designed to do, aside from create a working class that can, you know, fill in the needs of the elite who want to use the rest of us to achieve their goals, which again is an evil thing to do, to exert
yeah,
authority over others for your own goals. It doesn't, if it's not benefiting those people, it's an evil thing to do. And they have to, you know, manage the consent of this, because if we all understood this plainly, we'd say, no, stop, you can't do that. So it's been hundreds and hundreds of years of them moving pieces on the chessboard to get to a point where they have a slave state, and then the ruling elite. I think that's kind of what's implied with Plato's work, where he talks about Atlantis being ruled by sorcerer kings. Like these are the types of concepts that the elites love. They would love to have a society of almighty, all technologically powerful humans that the rest of us worship, right? And I
yeah,
think that's kind of what we see in the ancient world, whether those gods were entities of another world or entities of another planet or of a higher spiritual dimension. I don't know. I'd like to optimistically say that those were beings of a higher dimension that were here to um, educate us or transmute whatever our former state was to where we are now. But it's very difficult to say because we have uh, a society now that seems to be again working to exert authority over the rest of us rather than working to embetter the lives of the rest of or embetter their own lives and in turn the rest of us. I mean, I think that's what everyone should be striving for, but that's just not what's happening with Yale, Harvard, and these other Ivy League institutions, the highest level of academia. They're not achieving, things that are helping the rest of us. They're helping companies like BlackRock and, you
Yeah.
know, these great, huge proprietors of death. I mean, really, like Lockheed and Martin and the various companies that build engines and all the other parts that go into these very expensive machines that kill other people, right? I think there's a purpose to defending ourselves, but yeah, I don't know. It doesn't seem like these elites have any loyalty to the rest of us. So it's kind of concerning to see the military, be built up to this extent, and Yale is very much a part of that. I mean, the helicopter, the revolver, the gasoline engine,
Yeah.
the submarine. I mean,
It's
these were all
all
invented
Connecticut.
in Connecticut, yeah, and with money, tied to Yale.
Yeah. True story. I mean, people don't realize Sikorsky's right there. Colt is right there.
Yeah, they made it all
Groton
possible.
with all of it. It's all right there.
Yeah, and you can't blame Yale as a single entity, but New Haven and Yale exist within this cultural bubble that is creating these things, right? So
Yeah.
anyone who's living in this area is influenced by this precedent that's being set by Yale and New Haven. And how is that set? It's set through architecture.
Yeah. So explain some of that. What else is going on in New Haven? I mean, I mean, besides literally, there's dead bodies all over New Haven. I mean, literally,
Right.
like in places that, it, because either they built on top of cemeteries or whatever, it's wacky. But regardless of that type of energy, what, how are the things like architecture manipulating and or setting up things to influence people and the such?
So what we're looking at when we look at that 9 square grid, it's not only pulling in the energies of Saturn through its form. Okay, it's a vessel designed to hold the energies of Saturn. If people can kind of wrap their heads around that, almost like you wouldn't design a bicycle with a dog in mind. You design a bicycle with a human in mind because a human is going to ride a bicycle, right? So it's kind of, I don't know, not the best analogy, but that's kind of
I
how
understand what you're saying, though.
you're creating the seat through which Saturn will sit and exert its influence, right? So each of the classical planets have an influence that we can sort of imbue the influence or represent it symbolically in order to channel it into
Right.
the atmosphere, into the zone that we're experiencing our lives through. And with New Haven, again, that 9 square grid, it's oriented on, I think it's about 32 degrees off from north south,
Hmm.
possibly a hint to Freemasonry.
Possibly. Right.
But it's also a very biblical setting. Okay, I got to find the photo on my computer here to show you, but there's a really interesting drawing of New Haven from around the time when it was founded, and they place it in this very biblical kind of setting. I'll show you right here. I just found it. You have the two mountains, East Rock and West Rock, on either side of the city, and corresponding to rivers on either side, the Mill River and the Quinnipiac. And is it Mill River? It might be the yeah, Mill River and Quinnipiac. There might be another river called the Salty Marsh River, something like that.
Something like that, right?
Yeah, the one that goes near West Side, actually, or Westville,
Yeah.
near the Yale Bowl. So yeah, here is our sort of drawing of what New Haven looked like back then. I mean, totally different from what it looks like now. The wharf
Yeah.
used to go up to the 9 square grid and connected to the Quinnipiac River right there. And yeah, whenever you have water flowing in proximity to a city, it's going to imbue that energy and magnify it, right?
Absolutely.
Venice is a great example of this. And the Venetians have impacted the world in a way that's comparable to New Haven. If you're a historian or interested in history, you could probably read a dozen books on Venetian history because they've been very influential. But aside from that, New Haven also has this harbor, which was kind of like not only the reason why they built it here, but it's kind of in those days that was, I mean, you could make or break your community, right? Like
Oh, absolutely.
there's no way around that. So I don't know. It's sort of a strange drawing too. Like we have the Ouroboros, if you notice that, the snake
Yeah.
eating its tail wrapped around it, and these angels on either
There's a lot
side.
of imagery there.
Yeah. And then we have we have the compass coming down from the sky, God's hand coming down from the
Yeah.
sky with the Freemasonic compass. So
Nod to masonry there.
yeah, this was definitely drawn in a time when I imagine this was probably drawn when Freemasons were very much a part of New Haven's culture. They still are. There's a big Freemasonic lodge in New Haven. It's one of the oldest in America, and it's had a bunch of prominent Masons who've gone on to affect American history in some major ways. So yeah, this image here, I don't know the origin of it. I should track that down, but you can see that they thought of East Rock as this holy mountain. That's why they have this word right here above it. It signifies the place where Moses uh, first spoke to God through the burning bush, right? That was up on Mount
Yeah, that
Sinai,
was
was
at
it?
the base of Mount Sinai. Yeah.
Yeah, so this was very important to the people founding New Haven with this biblical lens. You know, the Puritan planters, they thought of this as like the new Zion, right? This is a term you'll see even in New Haven. There's the New Zion Church and things like that. So, yeah,
I mean, it was founded by Puritans, so period.
right.
It kind of explains everything, right? I mean,
And it evolves to, you know, allow for a bunch of different types of what we think of as Protestant versions of Christianity. But these Puritans that settled in New Haven were hyper Calvinists. And some of these beliefs are part of what Skull and Bones kind of represents in some ways. So the hyper Calvinists believe that humans are inherently wicked and offend God, that there is an elect chosen people who God chooses to save regardless of their actions.
and the
Very
rest of us are screwed.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
very odd considering what's talked about now in modern Christianity that, you know, oh, everybody's saved, and but they actually designed the New Haven Green to be 144,000 or however many, yeah, it's 144,000 people are saved
Yeah.
at the end time, the
Yeah,
moment
I
of
can't remember what they're
revelation.
called, right? What are they called though? There's a name for them, but yes, 144,000.
And that's how they designed the 9 square grid so that 144,000 people could stand in the green shoulder to shoulder. It's pretty
I
crazy.
mean, that's some. It is kind of crazy, right? Wow. Have
And
you?
really, it's a death cult, you know. It's
Yeah, really. In essence, it sounds very eugenic to me. Just saying.
yeah. Well, and it's not just like, oh, these are silly medieval people, and you know, we don't think like that anymore. Like this is stamped into the fabric of the American consciousness. You know, I mean, it's part of
Yeah,
why we had the witch trials, and that energy has made its way into what it means to be from New England. Like you're from Connecticut, you understand the dynamic here. It's very much the haves and the have-nots. You know, you can be
yeah.
from like the bottom of the barrel, like Willimantic or Bridgeport or wherever. Like, you know, you name, no offense to anybody who lives there.
Oh no,
You know, like
I
we
grew
all
up
are,
right on the border there, so
yeah, like we all like, you know, exactly, like Milford. I grew up in Milford, and it's right on the border of West Haven, and West
yeah,
Haven's right there next to New Haven. And yeah, it's, you know, you have these stark disparities and inequalities. You know, you can be on one block and there are $1 million houses and homes, and then you walk another block and the homes are like dilapidated, and you're like, what happened?
you're in the hood, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
And
that's literally how it was.
well, and that um pattern was kind of built in New England, and it made its way into the rest of the country. Like one of the big social experiments that was done in New Haven, and you can still see the effects of it to this day, was when they built I-91, which branches northwards from I-95. They decided very particularly where they were going to build it, and they basically said, okay, here's the Italian neighborhood, here's the black neighborhood, here's the center of town. Let's cut the Italian and the black neighborhood in two, and push the black neighborhood even further away from the center of town, right? And this has been done over and over again. It's like
Yeah,
zoning for
I
the
live in
addition,
Syracuse now, and it was done there too.
right?
And now they're dismantling it,
Well,
but
they
yeah, I mean
realized
that's a
it was a failed.
definitive line.
Yeah, they realized it was a massive failure in social infrastructure and created poverty and crime. And yeah, it's not a great way to segment a society. But this was in the minds of the Puritan types who believed that they were, you know, the elected few. And now
Yeah,
we're taught that, oh no, they were just racist slave owners. You know, oh no, don't. It's not about religion; it's about racism, which race is kind of a religious idea from the beginning too.
yeah. Well, it's just a different type of religion, right? Like they're literally, it's just a different way to divide.
Yeah. So, you know, from the beginning, we have this death cult that believes that there's sort of like an apocalypse colony. The world's ending. Europe is screwed. We need to flee to God's paradise to start over. And when the end of days comes, we'll be saved, right? This is in the minds of the people who are coming to New England. At first, they're, you know, trading with the Native Americans, working with them in a sort of agreeable way. And we all know how that story rounds out. And
Yeah.
they're very much a part of that too. They created the first missionary school for the Native American. It's called the Stockbridge Indian School. There might have been other schools before that one, but it's at least the first that I've looked into that Yale's connected to. And they essentially indoctrinated the population of indigenous people to become Christian or to leave. Like this was their choice. You either become Christian or you die or you leave. That's it, right? And that's why nowadays in New England, I mean, anyone who has indigenous blood looks like a white person for the most
Oh
part.
yeah.
You know, there's not really a distinguishing characteristic, or they look African American, as a matter of
Even.
fact. And it's very interesting because one of the things that I've learned through talking to people on my podcast is that this didn't just happen up here. This happened all along the East Coast, and to the point where some people who were told they were African American actually found out through the new science of DNA testing that they're indigenous.
Yeah.
So there's this whole racial, religious element to the history of the Americas that we're just not taught about, because I think in some ways the exploitation that took place, it still has to be answered for, and that's why it's being covered up. Because I mean, it sounds like social justice warrior nonsense, but the truth is that there's a, I don't know, a sort of prison
Yeah.
colony
Yeah,
that we've all
absolutely.
been taught to think is this amazing free place. It's free for the people who are elected, but for the people who have to follow the plantation rules, we're not exactly free, right? So
Yeah.
this idea that the slaves were free, I think it's really more that the free people were enslaved and made to think they were free. I don't know.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. I was perusing a map of New Haven earlier today, and so you've got the green, the New Haven green, and the patterns that the walkways create, right? Well, there's also another park that is down off Chapel Street. And the reason I know this park is because I mean, everyone talks about New Haven pizza, right? So we, and there's definite tribes. Some people are Sally's, some people, are, um, I don't even remember the name of the other one because I never eat there.
Pepe,
Yeah,
Sally,
Pepe's. I'm just kidding.
Modern.
I'm just kidding. But either way, there's a park right by there called Worcester Square Park,
Yeah.
which really does have the same type of patterns as well. Or I mean, I guess any park could if you look at it from above, but either way, it seems like there's this symbolism all over New Haven, right? So,
Yeah, I think the Worcester Square lines, they're more symmetrical, which is what you'll expect if you're just looking at your average park designed to be a park, right? You just
right.
symmetrical design. It makes sense. There's not necessarily an occult symbolism to it, but there could be. The reason why I think the New Haven Greens pathways are significant is because they're asymmetrical. If they were
Yeah.
symmetrical and they just went from corner to corner and bisected the square perfectly so that you can get from one point to the center as quickly as possible, then that would make a lot of sense. I think that's what most just pragmatically thinking designers would do. That's not what happened with New Haven.
Yeah,
Obviously,
no,
a
because I'm looking
history,
and it's like some of them are just really. I mean, even like the stuff is offset. It's
right.
so bizarre.
Well, and you you
Yeah,
you have to account for, well, certain trees are there already that they don't want to
obviously,
cut down,
right?
right? So you don't have a perfect flat space to build upon. You have to make use of what's there. And then also on the green, there's a huge swampy area
Yeah,
in the southeast corner of the New Haven Green, and there's actually a fountain there now. So they've done
yes,
some work to remediate the grounds so that it doesn't become a swamp every summer.
right.
And I think that's why they put that fountain there. But the fountain is interesting. I actually, what's funny, Bennett, is it's called Bennett's Fountain,
Yeah, I
and
know.
and it's got a lion's head on it, which I've always thought was neat. But beyond the name Bennett's Fountain, I didn't really look into that, and I wish I
It just
had.
really looks like an unfinished pentagram.
That's right.
It's like they got halfway done and they're like, "Ooh, wait, that looks like a pentagram. Maybe we should shift."
Well, so the
Right? Or
ones that
something along those lines.
so
Literally something along those lines.
Right. So when you well, funny, yes, no pun intended. So when you look at the New Haven Green, Temple Street is a new addition, right? That was
Right,
not
right.
a
That was never
roadway
there.
initially. That was just a walkway initially.
Right.
Um, but when you take into account that now there's two greens, there's the west and the east half of the green. The western half has what you're kind of describing is almost like an unfinished pentagram, whereas the eastern half is what I would call an unfinished unicursal hexagram. And
Yeah, you're right.
that's not a common pattern. The only reason I know about that pattern and its name is because Aleister Crowley uses it prominently in his tarot card deck. It's like the major design. It's
Yeah.
the only design that's on every card. So to me, I'm like, oh, that must be significant. Crowley was kind of like a whore in the sense that if there was anything worth anything in the occult, he wanted it, right? So he just kind of took everything like a smorgasbord and put it all together into one thing, which I mean, that's probably a rude way of putting it, but you know what I mean.
Which yeah.
He was like he kind of hodgepodge things together, right? So why is that symbol significant? I think it has something to do again with that Kabbalistic magic. The 9 square is Saturn, okay? And then the pattern you're drawing on it is what you're influencing Saturn to do. So that's your sigil, okay? So the 9 squares each have their own value within the
Yeah.
whole shape. So the whole shape means Saturn. Now, the design within the shape itself can mean a myriad of things because you're basically creating a message to Saturn, right? And you can do this with a square arrangement for Jupiter. There's one for each planet, right? It's all about the mathematics. So the Kabbalah gets pretty complicated because it's a lot of this mathematical stuff that I don't really feel suited to explain because I don't fully understand it. But that's I think what's going on. To my best estimate, that's what's going on. But there's a lot to the landscape magic. Feng shui is this. We think of it as an Eastern art, but the British took a lot of that information when they um, made their inroads into China, and it inspired a lot of the outdoor landscape architecture of England. So, the people of Yale, these intellectual elites, they don't just stay in one place. Even back then in the early days of Yale, they would travel to England and travel here and there. So there was a lot of influence, these alchemical landscape ideas. I think that's really what we're going for here is creating, they're setting the table so that they can invite in the influences that they're looking to interact with. That's kind
Yeah.
of the way I see the architecture of New Haven. And on a large scale, you have to look at the way the streets are situated, what they're connected to on the macro scale of those ley lines we looked at, and then also the energy, the physical energy of the land itself, right? Because it's not static, it's moving over time. The plates are pushing against each other. And
Right.
this plate that we're on, the New England land area, that is on this really old piece of land that actually at one point in time was fused with the same pieces of land that are currently what make up the island of the British Isles. These islands were all part of that same landmass that you and I are still on. If you're up in upstate New York, you're on that landmass, sort of. I think after you cross the Hudson River, it becomes a different part of
Yeah, I think you're right because I think what they were saying is that the eastern side of the
Appalachian Mountains. Yeah.
yeah, but the Appalachians, but the like the Adirondack Park,
Right.
right? Like Hudson Lake Champlain
Yep.
was basically that in Scotland were like one landmass.
And
So,
Northern Africa as well, and what is
right.
now Spain. So this whole area was one fused piece of land. And because of that, there is a metaphysical power that you can, I think, connect with if you have your, like the game Risk, if you have your pieces in the right
Yeah.
parts of the map, you can assert power over the rest of.
Well, it's kind of a quantum thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I mean, it's yeah, absolutely. Um, uh, there's, and then there's those thin PowerPoints throughout, different areas, especially in New England, that coincide with places across the sea as well.
Yeah.
And we say ley lines, but there's also parts that are even like points that are even and I call them, well, over in Ireland, especially, they call them thin spots.
Hmm.
And it's kind of where it's not just like energy, but it's also where the veil is thin. So you have whatever is on the other side, whether it's other realms or whatever.
So,
It's a flashpoint for kind of all this type of stuff. Almost
so
like a highway, right?
I love that you're saying that. The thin spot, I've never heard that term before, so I just wrote it down. But the highway is, I think, what's going on with the two burial places in New Haven. So you have the Green, which we talked about, has dead
Yep.
bodies buried underneath the west side of it. And then we have the New Cemetery, which is America's first planned cemetery. So it's not the first place where people were buried, obviously,
Right.
but it was the first park like cemetery. So before this, all of the burial grounds would have been behind a church. That's it. Or next to a church. That's pretty much how cemeteries worked. Even in England and Europe, you would have a road leading to the cemetery from the church. So after you have your
Right.
funeral, the body's taken to the cemetery. So this happened with, obviously, New Haven right behind. People would be buried. Done. Once they built the new cemetery, what happens there is there's a road that's created for the passage of the dead. Okay, so at the funeral, the spirit is thought to actually leave the body and then use this road to eventually make its way to its resting place. It's wherever its tomb, its headstone is, right?
Yeah.
So whatever's in between the Green and the new cemetery, because remember the Green has the churches on it, is this road. Now, with Yale, they actually had a church on campus as well, and it's on the same road that the new cemetery is on. So, what else is on that road? Well, we have the art museum, we have Skull and Bones' tomb, we have the
Yeah.
major centerpiece of Yale University, Harkness Tower. We have the Sterling Memorial Library, the Sterling Law School, I think it's called. We have the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library, and then we have Book and Snake's tomb, and then finally the Garden of the Dead or the Grove
Mhm.
Street Cemetery. So they're all
Right.
on this one street,
Oh,
and to me that is significant. This is like
yeah, for sure.
the occult spine of Yale. You have the Book and Snake tomb and Skull and Bones tomb literally, I think, exactly 2 blocks away from each other. One is on the west side of the street, the other is on the east side of the street. And the art museum, of course, has all of these amazing things from all over the world. And in my opinion, things that are significant to the esoteric culture of Yale. So
Mhm.
Mithraism and Gnosticism are highlighted. And this is kind of England's hodgepodge, various
Yeah.
Francis Bacon, the
I
New
mean,
Atlantis.
isn't Mithra somehow related to Saturn as well?
Yeah, yeah, I think Mithra is there. Well, there's a couple characters in Mithraism, but Mithra himself, I believe, is the god that kills the bull, or has something to do with the bull, and considered like the dying sun.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah, right,
esoterically speaking, Saturn would be the dying sun or the dead sun because
right.
it supposedly at one point in ancient history was itself a sun that has now reached, at the point in a star's lifespan where they're reduced, tremendously in brightness.
Hmm.
So it's like, our sun, what we now call our sun, will eventually look like something like Saturn, a gaseous planet. So in that sense, Saturn could have been our previous sun, and that's why they're worshiping it, because they're acknowledging that humanity is so old that we remember the previous sun, right?
Right.
And this is, again, that esoteric religion, that esoteric culture that is satanic, that does want to control others, exert authority on others, play by their rules, and while we
Just
all
gets
have to,
so deep, man.
yeah.
Like,
It goes well, and that I'm in no way like it's speaking about this in a concise way, because for me, like, there's so many points of information.
yeah, it's
It's so
so,
difficult unless I sat down and said like, all right, I'm going to give a presentation. I'm going to start here
yeah,
to there. Like it's a lot to throw at somebody. And because you know New Haven as well as someone who's lived there, since you've lived there, like, it is kind of a treat for me to explain all this to you. So I apologize
yeah.
for
No, 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 no.
throwing it all
It's
at
great.
once.
No, it's great. Um, and it's just I like opening. I like digging little holes. Um, I did Nephilim Death Squad the other day, and
Okay.
Top brought up the point. He's like, I don't dig rabbit holes. I don't dig holes. I dig holes deep enough so people can twist their ankles in them. And that's what I like to do. And that's what you're doing, frankly. It's awesome. It just kind of it cracks open the door enough that people should do their own research, which is kind of what this whole podcast is about. Hence the name Broadcasting Seeds. I'm not trying to, I'm just tossing them out there, man, literally.
Mm.
So,
Well, in this landscape alchemy, landscape metaphysics, like, it's going on everywhere.
well, what did we call it? Geomancy?
Yeah, geomancy specifically is that Saturn pattern that I
That
showed
earth
you.
divination.
Yeah, so they're in a way. Well, I think divination. There's a few different ways to understand divination. So, in one sense, divination is kind of like fortune telling. I think that's what most people think of when they think of
Hmm.
divination. Like, I'm going to do a thing to understand the future. Yes, that is divination. That's practical divination. But the other side of divination is like, I know that Saturn does this. So,
Hmm.
in order to appease Saturn, to have that outcome, I'm going to do this, right? So you
Right.
want Saturn to have this influence that you can't do that yourself, but what you can do is you can create a situation where Saturn will do that for you, right? So
Yeah.
that is kind of the idea here, is that these planetary energies have tremendous influence over our lives, and they work in a cyclical way, as our seasons do. And at certain points in the year, their energy is stronger. So if you have the right circumstances for maybe like this recipe to uh, occur in just such a way that the influence is not only shown but then captured, right? So you have the light and it hits the photograph, and then you have the photograph, right? You don't have to keep the photograph in the light. The chemicals have been exposed to the light, they have the image, and you have your, what your intended outcome was. So I think of it in that way. So the architecture itself is like those chemicals on the photo pan, and as the light hits them, they express and they retain that energy, right? And with these buildings, well, how do they do that? They use certain materials, stones and things like that. And I
Yeah.
think, getting into like the larger implications of this, that also might help us understand why, for the most part, humans as a majority have been, at least in America, we've been pushed into these cheaper and cheaper versions of what a home is. And there's capitalistic drives behind that, economical forces behind that, but I think there's also this subtle energy degradation that's taking place because they
Yeah.
know if you don't live in a energetically healthy environment, then you're more manipulatable, you're more controllable, you're more docile, you're less
Yeah.
powerful, less able to create wealth and stand in their way.
And
And
that
this is what
shows with
the
all
elite.
kinds of stuff,
Yeah,
food, water,
yeah,
everything.
exactly. It starts with those, what is it, Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yeah, Maslow, yeah.
What are our basic needs? We need water, we need air, we need food, and we need shelter. So,
Yeah.
architecture is just that. We tend to think of it as a visual display of wealth or a purely aesthetic approach to something, but it's not. The containers through which we live our lives are very important, and I
Yeah.
think that the reason why Yale and Harvard and these other colleges, particularly Yale, though, because I can't just lump Harvard in. Harvard's different. They do have a lot of influence and they're older, but Yale is very
Different.
fresh.
They're absolutely different.
Right.
Period. Yeah.
Well, and Harvard is also at this point very spread out too. Like
Yeah.
MIT, I kind of think of as loosely a part of Harvard. People might disagree with
I mean,
that.
it's right next door though, so it's
Yeah, it's been segmented, and Yale is kind of that way in some ways. But the things that have been done at Yale have changed the world, and incredible.
yeah.
So it's something that I think has to do with the alchemy of the architecture itself, the symbolic qualities of certain buildings, and then the impact that has on the people that spend their time there, going there for school or just living near there, working there. I mean, a
Yeah.
lot of people that interact with that space, regardless of their, whether they're a student or not, it's a very open environment. As you know, when you live in New Haven, you have to go through Yale's campus. It's not, you don't really
You
have a
can't really
choice.
get around it. Yeah,
Yeah,
no.
it's
And
not like
and
other.
half of the stuff you do, even as a kid, like, well, I remember going, I mean, like places like Toad's place is on the campus
Right.
essentially, and like that's
Or
like
going to see the sports at the Yale Bowl or at that
yeah,
big
right.
tennis thing that they have.
Yeah, and the little amphitheater that's, I mean, everything. It's
Yeah.
all there. Like you can't get away from it. So,
I have really interesting memories of being there as a kid, just like, because when you're a kid, you don't have like a full scope of what's going on. But then when you visit those places later on in life, you kind of remember like a snapshot of something you saw when you were a kid. And
yeah.
that's something that I really love about New Haven. I think, the other places I visit in the United States, I haven't seen that quality of architecture. And I think that stone, that physical material, has a valuable cultural imprint
Well,
quality.
it's also got energetic
Right.
things involved, and
By New York
because you don't
City is
find
different
things like that in
too.
every city. You just don't. Even the oldest cities, it's different.
Yeah.
The city definitely has a different energy.
Yeah. Every city does, certainly, but with New
Yes.
Haven, there's a couple of key stones that were utilized as well. And the famous stone that people know because of New York City was actually a part of New Haven as well in a big way. Brownstone, right? You've heard of like
Yeah.
the brownstones. People live
Yep.
in brownstone apartments and they're renowned as these beautiful, amazing pieces of architecture. Well, that brownstone comes from Portland, Connecticut, for the most part. And Portland, Connecticut is right on the Connecticut River.
Hmm.
And the Connecticut River, at one point in time, flowed through what is now New Haven. So the Quinnipiac River at one point in time was not there. It was actually uh, a branch, possibly, or the actual former outlet of the Connecticut River. And then something meteorologically, or not astronomical event where a
Yeah,
meteor
something happened.
hit the Connecticut River essentially, and it changed courses to where it now lets out somewhere near in between Old Saybrook and Lyme there. But at Portland is where this stone possibly hit, and the Native Americans talked about this event in a way. They had a legend of a giant coming along and stamping his foot right there in the river. And what's interesting about that is, anyone who travels through Connecticut has probably seen the Sleeping Giant Mountain, right?
Yeah,
And
it's one of my favorite places.
yeah, it's not like the only site in the world where you can see a mountain that's shaped like a human, but the fact that the Native Americans have several different legends about these giants, and that one of them was killed by a thunderbird and now lays right where we see it as Sleeping
Mhm.
Giant. I found that significant
And has a
considering
haunted observatory castle on top of it. It's pretty crazy.
haunted. Oh
Yeah.
man, I didn't know that that was
No,
something.
supposedly there's and I've got friends that think that so there's there's an observatory or they call it the castle up
Yeah.
on top.
Oh yeah,
And
I've been there.
allegedly haunted by a black figure. Yeah, like a man in black.
Hmm.
So anyway.
No, you get some strange vibes up on that
Yeah,
mountain.
you do for sure. So
There's a there's something called Abraham's Cave on Sleeping Giant,
yep.
and I've never been to it. I've only read about it, so I don't know if it's a proper cave or
Yeah,
not.
I've
But
never been to it either.
apparently it's hard to get to, and somebody, I think he was related to P.T. Barnum, died there, and
Wow.
his body was found like several years after he had passed away. So who knows? He could be. But P.T.
See, that's
Barnum's
another
nephew.
character from Connecticut, man. P.T. Barnum. Well,
Yeah,
he's not from well, he is,
yeah,
but
he is.
that's where he died at least. So
I don't know where he was born, but he definitely
he
lived
lived in
in
Connecticut for
Connecticut
a
for,
long
yeah.
time.
He had the what was the name of his mansion? It was something like the Hindu something or other,
Yeah, I don't remember, but
or the Iranistan motel or something
something
like that.
wacky, right?
Yeah, because it looked like something out of like the Middle East. Like he
Yeah,
went and
like of
got,
out of Arabian Nights.
yeah, he got an architect to make it in that style. And yeah, Connecticut had its heyday, and I don't know that we're necessarily doing anything on that scale now beyond what goes on at the, major companies uh
Yeah.
and Yale and
Hey, Pepperidge Farm makes good freaking baked goods, dude. That's all I know.
well, and Yale owns something like 60% of the state, and not just
Yeah.
the land, but like politically they have a big they have big sway because of all the hospitals and so on and so forth. So, they have a lot of employees, right?
Oh
And
yeah, for sure.
yeah, that gives them tremendous power even to this day. But one of the things that they sort of innovated was these collegiate land grabs.
Hmm.
This is something that I've only roughly looked into, but they were part of some pretty massive changes to the way property was given out in the United States, and helped secure through certain laws a lot of land into colleges and
Yeah,
universities.
land grant stuff, land
Yeah,
grant colleges and stuff.
right. So
Yeah.
a lot of the free space in America has been taken over by some of these interests, and yeah, again, my theories and ideas aren't totally formed, and that's because I don't want to make any
Yeah, no.
allegations against anyone, like I'm not attacking Yale. I'm just curious about history, and
Yeah.
coming about this from a point of interest, like of curiosity, because I owe a lot to Yale and New Haven for putting me on this course, and also providing the circumstantial resources, like
Yeah.
Yale, because it's such a hotbed of activity in that intellectual sense. Like there's a lot of books and there's bookstores, and so I've really grown a lot from being around all
Yeah.
that and
Sure.
interacting with different people. But it's
Well,
also kind of
give
made me
yourself
think.
some shameless product placement. You've got, because you have an episode, and I think it's a members episode, right? That is all
Yeah.
about this.
Yeah, well, that's, I guess, an ambition that I'm still yet to realize. I would like to create something like a documentary series about, this, and kind of put the focus on New Haven and that.
And what are we calling it? The New Haven checkerboard or
I
chessboard?
called it the New Haven chessboard in our
Chessboard.
notes. I thought
That's
that
it.
would be an
Yeah, I
interesting
like it.
thing. But yeah, no, I've called it all sorts of things. The Order of Strange New Haven, things like that. But I'm definitely going to put it all together into something more digestible on a more widely accessible scale. I think through YouTube, a sort of video
Yeah.
documentary.
Oh
But
my
that
God, I
was
just
my
wrote
attempt at
New Haven cheese board. Ugh, I can't spell.
no, that cheese boards, those are a thing. But, but no, yeah, the Yale that episode, I forget. It's on my Substack. Thank you for giving me a chance. My family thinks I'm crazy.substack.com. But yeah, I regret to say that is kind of like the first episode of what I had hoped would be many, and I kind of stopped there because there's a
Yeah,
lot of effort to create that episode. So
right.
I got a little ambitious, and hopefully we'll
Hey,
pick it up.
where are we without ambition, though?
No, well, and there's other good stuff on my Substack, so it's worth mentioning. And if you do want to access all that, you get there's some articles I've written. We go into a little more detail. You can see my slides that I use for different podcasts, presentations, and then my podcast, which you can listen to ad free through my Substack. So thank you for
Nice.
allowing me to plug that. But if you want to listen to my podcast with ads for free, you can listen to it wherever you find this show or any other podcast platform. I'm on YouTube, and I have a website. If it's difficult to find, you can just go to my website, and then you can
Yeah, which I'll
navigate
put in the show
from there.
notes. I'll put all
Yeah,
the links. All the links.
myfamilythinksimcrazy.com. And yeah, I have a sort of article, a small book, if you will, that goes into the history and the architecture of New Haven on a very detailed level. So if you like what I've talked about today, there is a PDF which I want to send to you for free, and then maybe we can do this again in a
Absolutely.
while, and after you've looked through some of the things in the book, and we can talk in a little bit more detail. But yeah, if anybody's from New Haven or wants to learn about Yale or Skull and Bones, I've got a ton of information, and that book is available through my website. There's a store link there, and you can find the books. They're ebooks, so you just put in your email,
Yeah,
and then they
super
send it
easy.
to you. So yeah.
Awesome. Mark, appreciate you coming on, man.
Yeah.
And I could talk to you all night, I think, but I can't. My wife would kill me. Um,
I get it.
so yeah, but at the end of the day, I really appreciate you coming on, and we need to do it again.
Yeah, no, I'd be happy
We
to.
have a lot to talk about here.
Yeah, no,
I think
I'd be happy.
we're literally just scratching the surface.
Yeah.
So
Well, and if people are curious to learn more about Skull and Bones, Chris Milligan put out probably the best book available on the topic, and it's called Fleshing Out Skull and Bones. It's
wow.
written by him, but he also included the work of several other authors. So it's a great book because it compiles a ton of information on the subject. And that was pretty much where I got my start, because back when I met Amos and he told me about Geronimo, he also told me that you could read all about it at the library. So I went to the library and I found Fleshing Out Skull and Bones by Chris Milligan, funny enough, at my hometown library. And I don't think it's still there because I went back to look for it and it must have gotten taken out for some reason. Who knows why? Maybe they felt it was too saucy for the town. Who knows? I don't know.
Maybe.
Or maybe someone like me just was, bold enough to take it and never return it. But yeah,
Maybe.
I bought my own copy, Fleshing Out Skull and Bones. So yeah, that's a great resource for people who want to learn more about just Skull and Bones and all the history and what they're connected to.
Awesome. Amazing.
Right on.
I appreciate it, my friend.
Thank you.
So, we will be talking soon.
Right on. Yeah, and we got to have you on my podcast as well.
Oh, sure. Whenever, man. Just let me know.
Right on.
I got bad thoughts that make my mind scared. Hold me hostage and they don't fight fair. Who gon' pray for me and wipe all my tears? Who gon' save me if you not right here? Move this darkness and make my sight clear. Take me your way cause I don't like here. Ghosts of my past, they fill in the night air. Wake me up, I'm trapped in my nightmares. Wake me up, I'm trapped in my nightmares. Drowning, I'm off the deep end. Apparitions of all my demons. All my thoughts are committing treason. All alone, who gon' hear me screaming? Manifestations of my fears. Regrets that stretched out for light years. Can almost touch the light, homie, it's right there. Body free but trapped in my nightmares. Wake me up, don't let me drown. All the lights are fading.